Okay, this week's session starts in 2.5 hours, so we are going to crank this one out. Hey, I'm Freddy Pow Pow. Thank you for watching the series. If you are new to the series, I am DMing a full-time campaign, or excuse me, a full-length campaign for the first time. And I am using this series to kind of chronicle how things go for me, what I'm preparing for each session, how my preparations go after the fact, stuff like that. And like I said, this week's session starts in 2.5 hours, and I started preparing for it last night. So we're really gonna see what it's like operating under a crunch. Some context as to why this is happening. I mentioned this earlier, but this same group of people that is in my Call of the Netherdeep campaign, all of us except for one also do a Witchlights campaign, which is DM'd by the player who plays Felurian in this campaign. Which is nice because it gives us both 2 weeks to prepare for each session instead of 1 week. But the week after our last session, the Witchlight DM was out of town, so she couldn't run a campaign, so we skipped that week. And I figured that we would just push it back a week, and that this week, tonight, she would be running Witchlights. But as it turns out, she's also out of town this week, so instead of pushing back all of our campaigns by 2 weeks, we instead decided to just run Netherdeep tonight instead. And they did ask, and I told them yesterday that I would let them know by the end of the day whether or not I felt like I had stuff to run for a session. At the end of the day, I told them yes, and dear listener, I did not. But I knew that I would, so here we are. Anyway, last session. What did they do? Luckily, they did exactly what I expected them to do, and it worked out great for me. They started out by exploring Fort Venture, they found some cool treasure, they met Alon Frith, who was an NPC who was played by another DM that runs another one of my campaigns that was visiting that week. And he brought a lot of character to the character. It was not at all what I was expecting from that character, but I'm glad about the energy he brought. It was very fun. I didn't want to take any chances this time after the session before, so I did a thorough review of the inside of the fort and made sure that I knew everything that was there. There was one part that they missed, which I was very bummed that they didn't see, which was if they check the bathroom of the fort, they find a soldier inside who is just dead without any physical marks on him. And it turns out that he was in there while Bolbara was destroying the fort, and he dies of a heart attack because he gets spooked too hard. Part of their exploration was that they found the chapel in the back of the main hall of the fort, which is where the head of the fort, Inquisitor Pelengrost or something along those lines, it's where he was running experiments on Bolbara, but because Bolbara has already destroyed everything, they find him also dead. And he had a magical prosthetic arm, which they of course stole, and Ecos/Bash, our warlock, has been using it for prop comedy ever since. I don't expect that to ever change. They did venture back out into the forts. They didn't get lost because, as I said, we didn't have them do survival checks this time because they weren't trying to navigate through the swamp. They were just going towards the big floaty storm up in the air. They were making good enough time, so they did do the Bolbara fight that evening. And let me tell you, gosh, this party is strong. Especially the monk, especially Eric. I'll go into detail in a second. But basically, I did do the maximum HP for Bolbara. I was like, their fights have been too easy, let's make this one harder. And they still took her out in fewer than 2 rounds. And it's largely because of the monk, because he rolled such good stats to start off with. He is starting with a 20 in dexterity and a 16 in wisdom, so his starting AC at level 1 is 18. Nothing hits this guy. I'm gonna have to look more at enemies with saving throw based attacks that target his strength or his charisma because those are +0. But he really just doesn't get hit, and he deals so much damage so fast because he's a monk too. But also most of the encounters they've had have been against single opponents, like just Bolbara or just this one constrictor snake or 2 vine blights, but that's still a pretty low number of enemies. So we'll see what happens in this next session because there are some encounters that they might come across that are larger numbers of enemies. But they defeated Bolbara, they knocked her unconscious, they didn't check to see whether or not she was possessed by her patron still, but they just woke her up, they just healed her and just hoped for the best. And luckily, she's nice once she gets knocked unconscious. The possession breaks. They got a little bit of information from her, and then they inspected the ritual stone that was present at the battlefield. It has this thing where anyone who is playing a warlock can use it to cast commune with their patron. So both Bash did that, and Alon actually did that as well. He wasn't technically a warlock, but it felt appropriate for him to be able to do with what he was doing with his relationship with Ceratos, so we just let him have it anyway. It was very fun doing Bash's commune with Ukatoa because, commune lets you ask 3 questions of your patron, but I didn't want to just respond to them with, I am Ukatoa, hello, yes, you should do this. No, you should not do that. So it was very fun figuring out how I wanted Ukatoa to convey his responses to Bash. And the way I ended up doing it was that Bash put his hand on the ritual stone, and I made all of Ukitoa's responses be like changes in the texture of the stone. And I felt good about that. It felt good. I think it worked. But overall, last session, very smooth. And one thing that I didn't realize until I was on this side of the DM screen is when things are running well, there's a lot of time when I don't need to do stuff. Like, I just get to sit here and watch like my own little improv show as like all my players are just talking to each other and planning and doing stuff. So I get some good downtime where I can like make notes and like plots and figure stuff out, and it's cool. I enjoy it. But anyway, this session went well. I felt way more prepared about this one than I did about the previous one, and they did exactly the amount of stuff that I was expecting and hoping for them to do. So this, great. Couldn't have gone smoother. Moving on into the next session, despite my very little prep time for this, I am very excited for how this one's going to go. We are going to do our first dream sequence. It's going to be for Melusina, the fairy barbarian. I want to use this as an opportunity to start teasing characters' subclasses now that they're getting closer to level 3. And since Melusina is going to be a Path of Wild Magic barbarian, where the flavor of it is that the 8 options that can happen when she goes into a rage are going to be her being possessed by one of her different family members. We're going to have a dream sequence where we get to meet some of those family members a little bit. It's going to be a dream flashback to the night that her family was killed. It's going to start with her mother like hiding her away. We'll see what she does, and if she tries to escape from where she's being kept, or some other reason if she doesn't do that, we're going to have her consciousness get shunted over into her father's perspective in the combat. And I've created a stat block for her father. It's based off of some sort of warlock enemy that I forgot what it's called right now. I'm going to send her that stat block, and she's going to run her father for a few turns in combat. Once her father takes a few hits, he'll be killed, and her consciousness will get shot over to her mother's body, and I'll send her that stat block also. And during this whole fight, we're going to get little glimpses of her other family members fighting. And we're going to see those family members do actions and moves that are going to be reflective of the buffs that Melusina gets when she uses her Path of Wild Magic rages. For example, we're going to see her sister like shove someone off of the top of a balcony, then jump off of it, teleport down to the floor, and like attack them as they land on her. And this is going to be corresponding to one of her wild magic rages that gives her the ability to teleport. So I'm very excited for this whole scene. It's going to be a lot of fun. I did warn the player that something like this was going to be coming up for her. I told her that she should probably play using her iPad instead of just her phone this time, because I'm going to be sending her stat blocks. I didn't give her all the like nitty gritty details, so she doesn't know what's really going to be happening in this scene. But she is a newer player, so I wanted her to have a little bit of an idea of what was coming. After that long rest that they're going to be having that night, they're going to set off back into the swamp, back towards Urzen. And I'm expecting today's session to end in Urzen somewhere, whether that's right when they get back or after they get back and talk to the Ogre Lord Bufal and like complete their, debrief in the city. On their way there, I'm expecting them to hit up a couple of the different locations that they didn't stop at on the way through the swamp the first time. There's a sunken boneyard where there's like 7 lizard folk that they have to fight, including a shaman. There's a crumbling tower full of giant spiders. Really a lot of encounters that would be bad for a level 1 squad, but they're level 2 now with 3 companions. So hopefully they'll be a little more manageable. And I'm expecting the brunt of this session to be those little location encounters. I've gone ahead and reviewed all those encounters in detail again. I didn't want another case of when I got caught off guard by the Bullywug Cave. Speaking of the Bullywug Cave, this is the map that I've pulled out for that. There's a little like treasure hoard in the middle because the Bullywugs just have a bunch of stuff stashed in the middle of their cave. And yeah, I feel like I prepared for these encounters better than I did the first time that they went through them. Outside of that, I just have been like kind of getting struck with like little bits of inspiration about stuff that I might want to do way, way down the line. Like I've had an idea for maybe one of Melusina's relatives gets resurrected somewhere off screen during the campaign. And they'll notice this because they'll go into their rage and it'll trigger the wild magic surge corresponding to that character, but nothing will happen because they're not dead anymore to possess her. And I'll give her like a different buff to like balance that out mechanically. So it's not just like her getting nerfed, but like, a cool thing of like, this power didn't work. What's going on? I'm thinking of having the vampire enemy from Eric's backstory be somewhat related to Ceratos, the patron that Alon Frith was worshipping, because I just think that would be a fun way to work that back in. And Alon might like come back in the story if that player wants to like sit in for a few more sessions later. So I'm just looking for ways to tie things together, Anyway, I think that's it for this week because, like I said, I have to be ready for this session in 2 hours now, so I should get back to doing that. Sorry for the kind of rushed episode this week. Ain't that just the way? Anyway, subscribe, like, follow, comment, all that good stuff. I appreciate you watching the video, and go run your own thing. It's fine. Look at me. I'm having fun. Oh boy.